Hello, Wanda. I'm so pleased to be able to ask you a few questions for this presentation. And the first one is, what is Africentric analysis?
I think that's a good way for us to start this discussion, Nancy, because when we talk about doing an Africentric research project, sometimes people are not quite sure what that means. So when I think about it, I think about the significance of understanding anti-Black racism. And I think about the lens that we bring to the work that helps us to understand the impact of race and racism on the people we're working with and with regards to the work that we're doing. And Afrocentric analysis really sort of is, if we could start with the notion of centering. So we center the people that we're doing research with, but we also must center ourselves as the researchers doing this work. And one of the things I think that people often get confused about is they think that an Afrocentric perspective, an Afrocentric theory, is only for people of African descent. And one of the things I think that we demonstrate through our work together in this project is that an Afrocentric analysis can be used by non-Africans as well as Africans. Part of it is just recognizing an Afrocentric worldview, and an Afrocentric worldview really focuses more on community and collectivity and those elements that highlight what we have in common as opposed to how we're different. So if we start with that Afrocentric view of the world, and then we sort of think about the principles. What are the principles that guide our work? So it's about that centering, as I said. It's about seeing people as subjects of the work and not objects. We're not objectifying people. Mm-hmm. And it's really about valuing, how do we value people? How do we value the lived experiences of people? How do we value and honor first voices? How do we bring those voices in and give them space to be heard? Mm-hmm. And it's about rooting in an Afrocentric and African value system. So I think about the Nuzo Saba, or what most people would be familiar with the term Kwanzaa, thinking about those 7 principles. And then in this project in particular, we use the work of Ruth Revere, mm-hmm. and bring in that whole notion of the canons. Ruth Revere talks about 5 canons. She uses Swahili terms. Ukweli, truth-telling, kutoa, which is commitment, values, and knowledge construction. So that notion of how do we construct this knowledge. Utuva, which is focused on which means a justice-centered approach. Ujamaa, which means a community collective. And uhaki, which means balance and harmony. When I look at those 5 canons and I link those with the 7 principles of the Nuzo Saba, I think that that's the focus of the work in terms of doing an Afrocentric analysis.
Thank you. There's a lot to take in there, and I think I can safely say on behalf of all of our team that we've been really challenged and excited to have this form of analysis shape our work together. Could you answer this question from your perspective in terms of why are we still talking about white supremacy?
I think we're still talking about white supremacy because we're still living with white supremacy. Mm-hmm. White supremacy connected with capitalism is still very much the dominant ideology in Western society, in a lot of the world, really. And when those in power, those with power and privilege, fail to even recognize it, then there's the harm that comes from the abuse of white supremacy. Anti-Black racism exists because white supremacy exists. And we can't address issues of anti-Black racism without also addressing white supremacy. And there's a comfort that people have in talking about white fragility in that context of white supremacy. It makes people feel better somehow. And I think that we have a responsibility, we have a duty to name it, to challenge it, and therefore to address it.
I think that you've answered the third question that we had, which is, why is it important to name these things? And I think so many times in our classrooms, I can speak for myself, oftentimes these concepts and these realities are not spoken aloud. And I think to begin to even think about addressing white supremacy, we do need to be able to name it. What does this work require of us emotionally and intellectually?
I think that, to begin with, this work requires a lot of courage. You talked about the classroom, and I think we're talking mostly to educators, social work educators in this presentation. And so we need, one of the things that I've heard from students over the years is that often when these issues arise in the classroom, faculty are not equipped to deal with them. And I think one of the reasons why there's a reluctance to delve into these things is because of fear. So that's why I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to act. It takes a lot of courage to name white supremacy. Even for us to be having this conversation, it wouldn't feel safe for a lot of people to be doing that. But the fact that we're able to do that, and I think that one of the things we discovered in our work together on this particular project is that the work is very relational. And so part of this work is about building relationships. Part of the work is about learning to work together. Part of the work is about finding ways to support each other, finding ways to find courage when you're afraid.
And I think when you've named it as relational work, I think seeing it in that light helps reduce some of that fear. And I think it hopefully encourages further conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy.